Breaking news. The United States House of Representatives has just voted to approve the first article of impeachment against Donald Trump, charging abuse of power. Democrats secured a majority on that article, marking a formal and irreversible step in the impeachment process. With that vote, Trump becomes only the third president in U.S. history to be impeached. A second vote on an additional article of impeachment is scheduled to take place within minutes. It is important to be clear about what this means and what it does not. The House has not voted to remove Trump from office. He has not been ordered to resign. No emergency transfer of power has occurred. What has happened is the formal approval of impeachment articles initiating the next constitutional phase of the process. The situation remains fluid, and the outcome now depends on subsequent votes and proceedings. Washington is watching history unfold in real time. Inside the House of Representatives, something irreversible has just occurred. The chamber has voted on the first article of impeachment against President Trump, abuse of power, and Democrats have secured a majority. That single vote changes the historical record permanently. No matter how loudly Trump protests or how aggressively his allies push back, he will now be remembered as only the third American president ever impeached. The second vote on an additional article of impeachment is scheduled to take place within minutes. But before that happens, it is essential to slow this moment down and explain what is actually occurring versus what many people online are claiming is happening. Because right now, confusion is spreading faster than facts, and misunderstanding this moment leads to false conclusions about where things truly stand. There's a great deal of noise right now. People are saying Trump is being forced out. Others are claiming Congress has demanded his resignation and that he has refused. Some are asserting that emergency removal is underway or that power is already shifting behind the scenes. None of that is accurate. What is accurate is this: impeachment resolutions exist. Members of Congress are openly calling for removal, and constitutional mechanisms do exist that could theoretically force Trump out of office. All of that is real, but Congress has not voted to remove him. Trump has not been ordered to resign. No emergency constitutional process has been triggered. Understanding the difference between what exists on paper and what is actually happening in practice is the only way to grasp this moment honestly. The machinery for accountability exists, but machinery does not operate itself. This president has made it clear throughout his tenure that he is not motivated by abstract principles or institutional stability. He responds to what benefits him personally. When confronted with broader national concerns, alliances, constitutional norms, global security, those issues matter to him only insofar as they intersect with his own power and protection. That is why evidence alone does not guarantee removal. Evidence establishes grounds. Removal requires political will, and political will is something Congress may or may not possess at any given moment. That distinction is not academic. It is everything. Before going further, it is important to be honest about the media environment surrounding this story. Headlines are designed to provoke emotional reactions, not convey procedural reality. Sensational framing generates clicks, but it often distorts what is actually happening inside Congress. That distortion leaves people either falsely hopeful or prematurely exhausted. This moment requires context, not hype. Clarity matters more than drama because clarity tells you where leverage truly exists. So let's walk through what is real step by step. Multiple impeachment resolutions have been formally filed against President Trump in the current Congress. These are not rumors, leaks, or speculative drafts. They are official congressional documents entered into the public record. House Resolution 353 is the most comprehensive. It contains 7 separate articles of impeachment. Article 1 charges obstruction of justice. Article 2 charges usurpation of Congress's power of the purse. Article 3 charges abuse of trade authority and acts of international aggression. Article 4 alleges violations of First Amendment rights. Article 5 accuses the president of creating unlawful offices. Article 6 charges bribery and corruption. Article 7 charges tyranny. That word tyranny is not rhetorical flourish. It is not commentary. It is the literal language used in a formal impeachment resolution introduced by members of the House of Representatives. The resolution argues that based on documented conduct, the president has violated his oath to faithfully execute the laws and to protect and defend the Constitution. It accuses him of abusing powers that only a president possesses and doing so corruptly. That document exists. It is detailed, it is legally structured, and it is sitting in the Judiciary Committee right now. This is not the only resolution. House Resolution 415 also accuses Trump of abusing presidential authority and calls for impeachment. House Resolution 939 makes similar claims. These filings matter because they create an official record. They signal that a meaningful number of elected representatives believe Trump's conduct meets the constitutional threshold for removal. They are laying groundwork. They are preserving evidence. They are creating documentation that future Congresses, courts, and historians will have to reckon with. At the same time, individual members of Congress are publicly calling for Trump to resign. Editorial boards are arguing that he is unfit for office. Activist organizations are demanding accountability. These calls exist, and when people say Congress is calling for resignation, there is a kernel of truth there. Some members are making that demand, but Congress as an institution has not issued a formal ultimatum. That distinction matters because institutions act through votes, not voices. Here is where precision becomes critical. Filing an impeachment resolution is not the same as voting on impeachment. Calling for resignation is not the same as enforcing removal. Having constitutional tools does not mean those tools are being used. Removal requires specific procedures and specific numbers. There are only two constitutional paths. The first is impeachment. The House votes by simple majority to impeach. If that happens, the Senate holds a trial. Conviction and removal require a two-thirds vote, 67 senators if all are present. Trump has already been through this process twice. In 2019, he was impeached for pressuring Ukraine. The Senate acquitted him. In 2021, he was impeached for inciting the January 6th attack. The Senate acquitted him again. In both cases, Republican senators chose political protection over accountability. The second path is the 25th Amendment. Under Section 4, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president unable to discharge the duties of office. Power immediately transfers to the vice president. The president can contest that decision, at which point Congress must vote. Two-thirds of both chambers are required to keep the president removed. This mechanism has never been successfully used to permanently remove a president. It was designed for incapacity, not misconduct, and it requires the president's own appointees to turn on him. Right now, neither path is operational. Republicans control the House and will not bring impeachment resolutions to the floor. Even if impeachment somehow passed, Senate conviction would still require Republican votes that do not exist. The 25th Amendment is even less plausible. Trump appointed his cabinet specifically for loyalty. Expecting them to destroy their own futures by removing him is unrealistic under current conditions. So here is the reality. Removal is constitutionally possible, legally available, but politically blocked. Trump remains in office not because evidence is lacking, but because partisan loyalty still outweighs constitutional enforcement. That gap between what is documented and what is enforced is the most important thing to understand right now. This is not an emergency removal moment. It is a system under strain with mechanisms in place, evidence on record, and political will lagging behind. What happens next depends entirely on whether that political will changes, and that change does not come from speculation. It comes from shifts in public opinion, electoral consequences, coordinated action, and sustained pressure. Those are the forces that turn constitutional tools from theory into reality. Right now, we are not at the climax, but we are not at the beginning either. We are in the phase where outcomes are still being shaped, and that is exactly when understanding what is real matters most. So, if removal is not happening right now, the obvious question becomes this: what would actually have to change for it to become real? Because history tells us that impeachment is never just about evidence. It is about timing, pressure, and political survival. Presidents do not fall when accusations are filed. They fall when defending them becomes more dangerous than abandoning them. That is the inflection point Congress has not yet reached, but it is not imaginary and it is not unprecedented. There are 4 conditions that have historically shifted that calculation, and none of them rely on dramatic speeches or viral moments. They rely on incentives changing for the people who currently protect Trump. The first condition is a collapse in public support within his own coalition. Right now, Republican lawmakers fear Trump's base more than they fear general election voters. That fear is what freezes action. But if polling begins to show sustained erosion among Republican voters, especially older voters, suburban conservatives, and donors, the math flips. Defending Trump stops being protection and starts being a liability. That is exactly what happened to Richard Nixon. It was not the existence of evidence that ended his presidency. It was the moment Republican voters stopped defending him, which gave Republican lawmakers permission to abandon him. The second condition is a single precipitating event that breaks through partisan defenses, not a slow drip of allegations, but something undeniable and immediate, a clear criminal act caught on tape, a national security disaster directly traceable to presidential decisions, a brazen abuse of power that cannot be reframed, minimized, or blamed on others. These moments are rare, but when they occur, they compress timelines dramatically. Political reality can shift in days instead of years. Nixon, again, is the example. The tapes did not introduce new wrongdoing. They made denial impossible. The third condition is coordination. Individual acts of courage do nothing in Washington. One senator breaking ranks is isolated and punished. Two are marginalized. But when a critical mass moves together, the risk is distributed. That is why leadership matters. Until senior figures signal that it is safe to defect, no one moves first. But once that signal appears, movement can cascade quickly. Removal becomes less about bravery and more about herd behavior. Politicians follow exits when exits appear viable. The fourth condition is electoral change. This is the most concrete lever available to voters. If Democrats retake the House in the next election, impeachment becomes procedurally unavoidable. They would not need Republican permission to impeach. Even if Senate conviction remained unlikely, impeachment itself would force senators to go on record. It would dominate the political environment. It would alter donor behavior. It would increase pressure on institutions that currently hide behind delay. That is why midterm elections matter far more than most people realize in moments like this. This is why claims about Trump being forced out right now feel emotionally satisfying but strategically misleading. They skip over the hard middle. They jump straight to outcomes without explaining what creates them. That kind of framing leaves people confused when nothing dramatic happens the next day, and confusion turns into disengagement. Disengagement is exactly what protects entrenched power. What is happening now is slower but more consequential. The record is being built. The language is becoming normalized. Terms like abuse of power, corruption, and tyranny are no longer confined to commentary. They are embedded in formal congressional documents. That matters because it lowers the threshold for future action. It reshapes what is considered acceptable conduct. It signals to institutions downstream, courts, agencies, future Congresses, that this behavior was contested, challenged, and documented, not silently accepted. It is also important to understand that accountability does not come from one institution alone. Congress is only one piece of the system. Courts operate independently. Criminal cases, civil judgments, injunctions, and enforcement actions do not require impeachment to proceed. A president can remain in office and still be constrained. Power can be narrowed even when it is not removed. That is why Trump's legal exposure matters even when Congress stalls. Accountability is cumulative, not singular. The most dangerous misconception right now is the belief that if removal does not happen immediately, it will never happen at all. That belief turns frustration into resignation, and resignation is how systems decay quietly. Democracies rarely collapse in dramatic moments. They erode when people stop applying pressure because they believe nothing works. The truth is more uncomfortable and more demanding. Accountability is slow. It requires sustained attention. It requires elections. It requires forcing representatives to explain their votes over and over again. It requires making protection of misconduct more expensive than opposition to it. That work is tedious. It does not go viral, but it is the only thing that actually moves outcomes. Right now, Trump remains in office not because the accusations against him are weak, but because the incentives for those with power still favor delay. That calculation can change. It has changed before, but it only changes when people understand where leverage exists and apply it relentlessly. This is not the end of the story. It is the phase where outcomes are still being shaped, and that is precisely why clarity matters more than outrage. Here is the part that often gets lost, and it is the part that actually determines how this ends. Power does not disappear when it is challenged. It adapts. And when a president survives repeated accountability efforts, the lesson learned inside the system is not restraint. It is escalation. That is the danger zone the country is moving toward now. Trump has already absorbed 2 impeachments without removal. That alone changes presidential behavior. It sends a signal that impeachment is survivable, that party loyalty can override constitutional judgment, and that institutional checks are negotiable if political protection is strong enough. Every future decision is made with that knowledge in mind. When consequences fail to materialize, boundaries stop functioning as boundaries and start functioning as suggestions. This is why the distinction between documentation and enforcement matters so much. Right now, Congress is documenting, courts are documenting, journalists are documenting, historians are documenting, but enforcement is lagging, and that gap creates risk not just for this presidency, but for the next one. Because once a precedent is established that certain conduct is impeachable in theory but tolerable in practice, the standard has effectively been lowered. What we are witnessing is not just a standoff between Trump and Congress. It is a stress test of whether accountability mechanisms still operate when partisan incentives run in the opposite direction. The Constitution assumes good faith actors. It assumes that when evidence is overwhelming, political leaders will act to preserve the system itself. It does not account well for a scenario in which protecting one individual becomes more important than protecting the institution. That is why public understanding matters so much at this stage. Not outrage, not speculation. Understanding. Because the pressure that ultimately forces political will to change does not come from viral moments. It comes from sustained clarity, from voters knowing exactly who is blocking action and why, from representatives being forced to defend positions that are increasingly indefensible over time. There is also a psychological component here that is rarely discussed. Lawmakers delay not only out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that the problem will resolve itself. Hope that courts will handle it. Hope that elections will solve it. Hope that time will reduce the cost of action. That hope keeps people passive longer than they should be. But hope is not a strategy. It is a postponement.